Following the Second World War, unfair criticism of the Italian army was very common in post war writings. Both during and after the war, Allied anti Italian propaganda ensured that the Italians were easy pickings for writers who were trying to promote the Allied victory. Whether or not you believe the Italian army of World War II was an underperforming fighting force, it's important to understand why this might have been the case. This presentation does not at all seek to criticize the Italian fighting man, but rather to explain the very difficult situation he found himself in from 1940 to 1943. It was said by Italy's Undersecretary for War, Carlo Favagrossa, that Italy would not remotely be prepared for war until at least 1942. Italy had trouble procuring the raw materials needed for war, especially since most of these materials needed to be imported. Italy simply could not keep up with other European countries in terms of raw materials. This chart shows the procurement of strategic materials by Italy, Great Britain, and Germany in 1940. It is not difficult to see that Italy was quite far behind in resource procurement compared to its European neighbors. Italy had a rather small industrial base compared to its neighbors. Despite having several automobile manufacturers, these companies were very small compared to their American, British, and German competitors, and only had a limited output. The army lacked mechanization, having only 3 armored divisions and some fast cavalry divisions. These units made up a very small portion of the army. Outdated vehicle and tank designs, such as the L3 Tankette, were still being used by the Italian military during World War II, despite it being hopelessly outclassed. Italian leadership at high levels was also found wanting during World War II. Many high-level military officers were appointed by Mussolini and the Fascist Party. In many cases, these appointments were based on loyalty to the Fascist Party, not the military merit of the officer. So it's not surprising that high-level leadership was problematic during World War II. There is no doubt that lack of training was a problem with Italian soldiers as well. Prior to World War II, Italian soldiers were trained fairly well in a lengthy process consisting of several different stages. During the war, however, this system fell by the wayside, and troops were often sent off to the front with little and sometimes no training. An account dealing with Italian armored crews stated that these men arrived in North Africa with little to no training on their vehicles and were immediately thrown into action. The Italian army had some elite formations, such as the Bersaglieri sharpshooters, the Alpini, or mountain troops, and their paratroopers. These men had a much higher level of training than the average Italian soldier. But the truth is, these elite units made up a rather small percentage of the army, and were not indicative of the overall endemic problems associated with Italian training. For an army with many problems, Italian forces were largely overextended during World War II. There were simultaneous campaigns occurring in North Africa, Greece, the Balkans, and Russia. These significant and lengthy campaigns overwhelmed the Italian Supply Corps, whose job it was to supply the units in all of these different theaters. Long, distant, and difficult supply lines, often under attack by Allied forces, did not help the situation. It must be noted that by the time World War II began, the Italian army was already weakened and war-weary from their campaigns in the 1930s. These included finishing their war in Libya, the invasion of Ethiopia, sending troops to fight in the Spanish Civil War, and the invasion of Albania. These combined wars put a heavy toll on Italian finances and made the situation for the army even worse in Italy, as there was no money to train men, buy new equipment, improve their industrial capabilities, or adopt new military strategies. It has been well documented that Italy was treated dreadfully by their German allies. Many times, German mistakes were blamed on the Italians, or the Germans left the Italians in hopeless positions while they withdrew their own troops. According to author James Sadkovich, in his article of Myths and Men, Rommel and the Italians in North Africa, 1940 to 1942, Rommel often retreated, leaving immobile Italian infantry units exposed, withdrew German units to rest even though the Italians had also been in combat, would deprive the Italians of their share of captured goods, ignore Italian intelligence, seldom acknowledge Italian successes, and often resist formulation of joint strategy. Finally, as one might expect, this witch's brew of problems for the Italian army of World War II led to plummeting morale amongst Italian troops. The vast majority of Italian servicemen were conscripts who came from the peasantry, which was largely poor, illiterate, and generally did not trust their officers because they had almost nothing in common with them. Italian field rations for enlisted men were notably awful, and garrison rations were not that much better. The Italian soldier of World War II was one of the lowest paid servicemen in the world at the time, next to Soviet soldiers who received no pay. An Italian soldier received the U.S. equivalent of $1.51 each month, compared to $50 per month for an American private. Leave from faraway places like North Africa was seldom given, contributing to the perception that their officers didn't care about them. As mentioned previously, the subpar nature of his equipment did not endear the Italian fighting man to military service. All things considered, many Italian soldiers were extremely brave and actually fought very well considering the position they were in. To this day, they have an unfair reputation of being cowardly or stupid when really their commanders and leaders failed them. The circumstances surrounding fascist Italy were not conducive to successful military actions. Had the Italians been led, supplied, equipped, and supported properly, their performance during World War II would have been quite different than it actually was.